Throughout our journey into folklore and the unknown, we've encountered a variety of strange, mystifying entities, some mischievous, others enigmatic. But few stand out quite like the figure at the heart of this tale. Feared across generations and whispered about in hushed tones across southern Africa, this being is not only terrifying in form, but sinister in purpose. A malevolent presence from ancient lore, said to be conjured by dark rituals and bound by deadly bargains. Tonight, we journey into the shadows to confront a legend both feared and alive to this day, the terrifying Tokoloshe. A senior detective, long past the prime of his physical strength, slowly made his way up a narrow stairwell in a worn apartment block. The elevator, predictably, was out of service again. Huffing and pausing to catch his breath, he grimaced, imagining his wife's voice in his head, scolding him for ignoring her advice to stay active. He pushed her phantom nagging aside and climbed the final flight to the 13th floor, where a uniformed officer stood guard outside a unit. A short exchange later, the detective stepped inside. Inside the modest apartment, the body of a woman lay lifeless on her bed. Paramedic equipment surrounded her, silent testimony to a futile attempt at revival. The detective surveyed the room, hoping for a clue, a sign of struggle, a cause of death. Nothing. He found the forensics officer, an old colleague, in the adjacent room snapping photographs. After a quick handshake, the examiner led him through a reconstruction of the night's events. The victim's husband, distraught and confused, claimed to have awoken to find his wife unresponsive beside him. While rising to call for help, he spotted something in the room's shadows, something small, hunched, and watching. In the corner, lit dimly by a fading bedside lamp, he noticed a pair of glinting red eyes. The shape was vaguely childlike, coated in dark fur, its form nearly blending into the darkness behind it. Panicking, he had chased the creature through the apartment, pushing furniture aside in the process. 3 bullet holes now scarred the living room wall, each one less than 2 feet off the ground. The creature had been small, but fast. The final note in the detective's pad, written with a heavy sigh, read just one word: Tokoloshe. The earliest colonial records of the Tokoloshe trace back to the 1600s, when Dutch settlers began observing peculiar habits among their African domestic workers. In many households, these women, often nannies and housekeepers, had taken to stacking their beds unnaturally high off the floor. They used bricks, crates, and even large stones to elevate themselves several feet into the air during sleep. When asked, they warned that sleeping on the floor could result in death. This wasn't superstition, it was survival. These deaths, mysterious and unexplained, particularly affected young women and children. Local tradition laid the blame not on disease or misfortune, but on a demon, one summoned through dark magic and malice. A creature whispered about in hushed tones, feared even in silence, the Tokoloshe. According to oral tradition, the Tokoloshe is not a natural being, but a manufactured one. When someone wanted revenge or wished harm upon another, they would approach a sangoma, a witch doctor. The ritual began with the desecration of a fresh corpse. The eyes would be burned with heated metal rods, then filled with enchanted powder. Through chanting and dark rites, the body would shrink unnaturally, reanimating as a twisted creature, now bound to the summoner's will. Described as a small, furry humanoid with claws like knives and teeth like jagged pincers, the Tokoloshe had another unnerving ability: the power to vanish from sight. By swallowing a special stone or sipping water, it could become invisible to the human eye. Once summoned, it would infiltrate homes through cracks, vents, or open windows, hiding in plain sight. Then, when its target was asleep, it would strike, scratching, whispering, and manipulating. Victims often woke with festering welts or cuts. Others suffered emotional and psychological breakdowns, sudden aversion to loved ones, violent impulses, or intense depression. Some were pushed to kill, but even summoners were not safe. The Tokoloshe demanded payment, the soul of someone dear to its master, taken when least expected. To protect against the Tokoloshe, families elevated their beds, keeping themselves out of reach from the floor-bound monster. It was said that the creature could not climb. Height was safety. Others relied on spiritual leaders, men and women of faith who had the rare gift of seeing and banishing such dark forces. What makes the Tokoloshe especially chilling, however, is its persistent presence. Unlike many folkloric beings, this demon has survived into the modern age. Even now, counselors, priests, and doctors across southern Africa regularly hear testimonies from those who claim to have encountered or been attacked by the Tokoloshe. In the 1950s, a string of gruesome murders shook a quiet rural region in northern South Africa. The victims, mostly women, had been slaughtered in broad daylight, often with no witnesses. Weeks into the investigation, police apprehended a missing man from a nearby village. He confessed to every killing but insisted he had no control over his actions. He claimed that after growing suspicious of his wife's cold behavior, he faked a business trip and returned home early one night. What he found disturbed him deeply. His wife lay asleep, smiling, while a strange, tiny creature nestled beside her, whispering into her ear. Blinded by jealousy, he stabbed her repeatedly. But the creature, instead of fleeing, leapt onto his shoulders and clung to him. From that moment on, he said, he became a puppet, committing murder after murder under the Tokoloshe's command. Decades later, in the late 1990s, a priest living in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, was approached by a wealthy woman begging for help. She believed her housemate was using sorcery to harm her. She showed the priest scars, fresh, deep scratches across her back and arms. She said they appeared overnight. In addition, trinkets and objects in her home moved on their own, but only after nightfall. The priest agreed to visit the home after dark. With the woman's key, he entered and began cautiously moving through the house. A soft scurrying noise broke the silence. Whipping around, he glimpsed a short, shadowy figure darting behind a cupboard. Pulling the furniture aside, he found it, a red-eyed, snarling creature no taller than a child, bearing razor-like teeth. It lunged at him, but the priest raised his crucifix and began to pray. The creature shrieked, then fled into the night. Days later, the woman contacted the priest, thanking him. Her housemate, the one she had feared, had suddenly fallen ill and died days after the encounter. In 2016, reports of missing children shook the Matabeleland region of Zimbabwe. Most were never seen again, but one 13-year-old girl from Inyati returned. She was disoriented, starving, and terrified. After recovering, she told police a chilling story. She had been kidnapped by villagers from a neighboring settlement and taken to a large house with a vast, empty interior. There, she was kept tied up. Alongside the human captors were 4 small, monstrous beings. These creatures perched on their shoulders and whispered commands. Under their influence, the villagers had kidnapped and killed children, sometimes even eating their flesh. The girl's tale enraged locals. A mob soon stormed the residence she described, setting it ablaze and killing all inside, destroying any chance of verifying her claims. Stories like these continue to spread across the continent. The Tokoloshe is still blamed for sudden deaths, violent crimes, and unexplainable tragedies. In 2018, a 4-year-old vanished by a river in Esigadini as his mother washed clothes nearby. No trace was ever found. Witnesses accused local witches, some saying they'd taken him to save his soul from the Tokoloshe, others that they'd stolen him to turn him into one. But could there be another explanation? Some anthropologists suggest that the legend may have formed around tragic, misunderstood events. For example, many traditional homes were tightly sealed huts where families slept near indoor fires. Over time, carbon monoxide poisoning may have silently killed vulnerable sleepers, especially those already ill. With no knowledge of the gas or its effects, people turned to stories. In their grief and confusion, the Tokoloshe was born. Still, to this day, no physical evidence has ever confirmed the creature's existence. But perhaps that's exactly the point. Whether a supernatural force or a reflection of something darker within us all, the Tokoloshe may be less a monster under the bed, and more the voice of hate, envy, and destruction that lies buried inside us.